Morning, everybody. Welcome. Thanks to those of you who joined me a little early for my guitar meanderings. I appreciate you stopping in for that. It's a funny thing, since I've been starting these Friday reflections and since I've been doing the guitar intros without singing. Because normally I'm a singer-songwriter, right? I play guitar and then I sing my lyrics over it. But for this project, I thought I would go instrumental strictly, because you get enough of my voice during the 30-minute chat. And it's really challenged me to start writing instrumental guitar music, and it's been a wonderful opportunity. It's something I haven't explored enough of. And so just another reason to be grateful about all these crazy changes that happened to us because of this COVID adventure that we're all on, including gathering here in this space. So again, welcome to all of you. My name is Peter Bolland. Welcome to Friday Reflections here at SanDiegoOasis. Thank you for registering and for joining us and for parting with your treasure and your time and your attention and your presence to be here in this space with us. We do this every Friday, and it's not like my more formal or more I don't know what word to use, more content rich webinars where I have a big PowerPoint, like the one we did last Tuesday. A lot of you were there. So we dove into a study of Taoism and a lot of my favorite passages from both the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu and from Zhuangzi's philosophy. Doing another webinar here toward the end of this month on Marcus Aurelius and the wisdom of Stoicism. So those webinars are really a great chance to spend an hour going through a lot of rich content, and then on top of that, a 30-minute dialogue where you all put your questions and comments in the Q&A there, and I get to respond to as many of them as I can. This is different. So this is more of a one-way street, and it's also not as rigorous, not as content. I don't have PowerPoint here. I jot down a couple notes, usually the hour right before I go on, because I really want what we reflect on in these Friday reflections to be contemporary and relevant and responsive to what's going on in all of our lives right now. And of course, today is a somber day of reverence here in the United States and in many, many places around the world because of what happened 19 years ago today. And of course, I'm talking about 9/11. You all realize, obviously, that today is September 11th. So that was 19 years ago in 2001 when the towers came down and the 4 planes crashed. And maybe that's why I'm wearing my suit today and dressing like I'm at church, because I feel like I'm at church today because of the gravitas of this momentous event in American history. So I just want to reflect on a couple of different pieces around my experience with 9/11. I know everybody has a 9/11 story, kind of like, where were you when you heard about 9/11? Where were you when you heard about John Lennon being assassinated? I can tell you a lot about that. Where were you when you learned about JFK being shot? So there's certain moments in our collective experience here in the United States where we have those cataclysmic events that change everything, and they just sear into your memory. And I certainly have that with 9/11, and I won't give you a journalistic lecture about what 9/11 was. You can certainly go online and read about all of that. Maybe many of you already have through the years, and watched the documentaries and read the books. I'll just check off a few things just in case somebody is a little fuzzy on it. 5:46 a.m. Pacific time, Tuesday, 5:45 in the morning on a Tuesday back in 2001. The first plane hit the tower, and then about 15 minutes later, the second plane hit the other tower. And then about a half hour after that, the third plane hit the Pentagon, and then a little after that, the fourth plane crashed in that field in Pennsylvania. All 4 planes had taken off from East Coast airports. They were all headed for California, 3 of them for LAX, 1 for San Francisco. And this was, of course, a very carefully planned, a very elaborately planned, and very well executed attack, very well funded attack also. by a terrorist organization that had been planning this for years. And on that day, 2,996 people lost their lives, 4 short of 3,000. That's 500 more than Pearl Harbor, making 9/11 the single most worst terrorist attack or any kind of attack on American soil. Also, the worst day, the single highest death count for firefighters. 343 firefighters, I think. I have it somewhere here. And about 72 police officers. So, 343 firefighters, many of them, of course, running up the stairs of the towers when they were on fire with 90 pounds of hose on their back. A scene immortalized in Bruce Springsteen's brilliant song, The Rising. So, today, all around the world, as I said, there is a somber reflection on that day and on the horrors of war and on what was lost. Of those 2,996 dead, there were citizens of 90 countries. Citizens of 90 countries worked in those towers. Many Muslims lost their life. The highest number of casualties came from Great Britain, working in the finance industry, of course. 90% of the deaths in the tower came from above the impact spot where the plane hit. So a lot of us have a lot of images and memory from that horrible day, and I just wanted to share with you a little bit about where I was at that time and what was happening in my life. It seems like 100 years ago in some ways. So where were you on 9/11? I'll tell you where I was. When I first learned about that plane going into that first tower, I was on a city bus. It was 6 in the morning here in San Diego. I was on a city bus in the dark, and riding downtown from my home in Normal Heights. And why was I riding the bus and not driving my car as I always have to work? Because in June, I got arrested and convicted of driving under the influence. So I got a DUI, my one and only DUI, in late June 2001. And, I got handcuffed. It was in the middle of the night. I just got done playing a gig. I was in a rock and roll cover band, and we played at a bar up in Vista. And, our gig ended at 2 a.m. and I loaded out. So it's 3 in the morning, I'm driving home. And it was my birthday. And I had had a few beers and maybe a little whiskey. And I was, I thought, doing fine and sobered up from all the guitar playing. But I got pulled over by a CHP and did a quick field sobriety test. He handcuffed me and placed me in the back of his car. Took me to the Vista jail where I spent the night. Long story short, I got convicted and put on probation, and that was a transformational time in my life. It was a shocking realization. I thought I was this nice guy. I thought I was this thoughtful, compassionate, philosophical guy, mindful. And yet, according to the state of California, I was such a dangerous person that I had to be chained with medieval steel chains and placed into a cage for 24 hours. So dangerous was I that the state of California took away my right, my privilege to drive a motor vehicle in California for 6 months. That's why I was on the bus that morning. And just to back up a little further, that was June. In May of 2001, one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. I got hired as a tenure track full-time professor at Southwestern College after 10 years of being an adjunct. So my wife and I had worked so hard to get through all those years of poverty as an adjunct instructor, and suddenly, after a series of interview processes, I got the brass ring on the merry-go-round. I got hired as a full-time faculty member at Southwestern College in May of 2001. So one of the greatest, certainly the greatest professional triumph in my life. And then just a few weeks later, this DUI, one of the lowest points in my life. So, in fact, there was a few weeks of terror there where Lori and I were worried over that summer. Is Southwestern College going to find out about my arrest and my conviction and withdraw their job offer? Those fears tended to be unfounded. They turned out to be unfounded, thank God. So there I was on September 11th, 6 o'clock in the morning, sitting on a city bus, riding all the way from Normal Heights to Chula Vista. It's about a 2-hour bus ride involving a bus, a train, and a bus. So I ride the bus all the way downtown, get off the bus, get on the train, ride down to Chula Vista, get off the train, get on another bus in Chula Vista, and ride deep into the suburbs of Chula Vista to Southwestern College to make it to my 8 o'clock class. So I did that every day for 6 months. And on 9/11, I was sitting in the bus with 4 other people. And I had my Sony Walkman on. Remember those? Played little cassettes, had a radio in it. So I'm listening to the radio, listening to my favorite morning comedy show, Dave, Shelley, and Chainsaw on KGB FM. And there's Dave Rickards and Shelley Dunn and Cookie Chainsaw Randolph and Chris Boyer. And they're all doing their comedy stuff and playing some classic rock once in a while. And that was just my pass the time thing to get through this 2-hour bus ride. And suddenly Dave Rickards, the host, said, we're getting some weird news out of New York that a Cessna or something has flown into one of the Twin Towers. Weird. Some kind of plane flying accident. What a weird accident. And then, of course, 15 minutes later, a second plane just went into the second tower. And that's when we all knew, that's when the hair on our arms all stood up. Those of you that were awake and experiencing it in live time as it was unfolding. That's when we all knew that something worse and bigger and more horrible was happening. And so I got to work that day knowing only that 2 planes had crashed into these towers. It took another 90 minutes for the towers to come down. By then I was in my first class. So as I got out of my first couple classes, got back to my office, looked online and went, and then the Pentagon, and then the plane in the field. And let me tell you a little bit about my connection to New York City. I know a lot of you have deep ties with the whole country and with the East Coast. I was born in West Paterson, New Jersey, now called Woodland Park for some reason. Anyway, I was born in West Paterson, New Jersey. It's about 25 miles west of Manhattan, right across the Hudson River, and then drive for a half hour and you're in Paterson, West Paterson. And so I have baby pictures and home movies of me as a little kid, as a toddler, running around in Central Park. Or there's me in my baby buggy going down Fifth Avenue looking up at the skyscrapers. And there's my mom and dad, nattily dressed in their New York clothes. This issue is something for some things we have 78 people on. Anyway, thank you for working on that. I guess we're having a link issue for some folks. Appreciate you all being patient. We'll try to get as many of you in as we can. So anyway, there were my mom and dad pushing me around in this baby buggy, and that is how my memories of New York began. And then furthermore, fast forward many years later to 2000. The summer before 9/11, Lori and I were celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary, and I thought, let's go to New York. So we were in New York City for 10 wonderful days, and we stayed at the Marriott in the financial district, which was right next to the Twin Towers. It was a really great place to be right there near Battery Park. You could see the Statue of Liberty, and there's the subway station in the basement of the Twin Towers. You can shoot up and down Manhattan, go wherever you want to go. It wasn't that long of a walk through Wall Street across the Brooklyn Bridge to go get some pizza in Brooklyn. It was an awesome trip. We'd hop on the subway and ride up to the Bronx, taking a Yankees game. Or we'd go up to Midtown, go to the Ed Sullivan Theater, where we had tickets for the David Letterman show. The Ed Sullivan Theater, right, where the Beatles had played, when they first came to America. And I remember being a little 5-year-old boy in Ventura, California, sitting on my living room floor watching the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, because we, of course, watched Ed Sullivan religiously every Sunday night, and the Beatles were on. And for a little kid like me, I mean, that opened up guitar playing for me. All my music came out of that moment. And so I just had a million connections to New York City, and we were in the Twin Towers a lot, and it was our neighborhood. We walked around there all the time. I have all these great pictures of those things, and that was just a year before they came down. So anyway, when those Twin Towers came down, it really felt to me like my neighborhood was under attack. And I know that maybe is sort of a solipsistic, selfish way to look at it. I wasn't harmed. I was 3,000 miles away. The horror of what happened to all those people eclipses all of my little feelings, but that's just how it felt when those towers came down. That full-scale warfare had come to my neighborhood. And it's something that we in America have really not experienced on that scale. And that shifted me in a really profound way. And, you know, a couple of the hijackers, 19 hijackers in these 4 planes, 2 of the hijackers, we later learned, lived here in San Diego for almost a year. They were from Saudi Arabia. 15 of the 19 kids were Saudi Arabian boys. They had come here a year earlier to LA, and then they moved down to San Diego. And they had a guy that was helping them, a local Saudi immigrant, although the FBI later determined that that man probably knew nothing about the plan. That's why we call them sleeper cells, right? They were on the down low. They were completely underground. They were fitting in. So they lived in Claremont here in San Diego, and then they lived in Lemon Grove for a while, both of those very near where I am right now. They took flight lessons at Montgomery Field up off 163, you know, across from In-N-Out Burger. That's how I know my neighborhoods, where the burger joints are. They took flight lessons, but their English was bad, and they failed flight school miserably. But the flight instructor did recount to the newspaper that it was curious. When they first got there, he said, yeah, we're going to fly this Cessna. And they're like, no, we want to fly these jets. And when do we get to fly the Boeings? And he was like, what? And so I'm caught by that too, at the commitment of these soldiers, these 19 soldiers who would sacrifice their lives in this way. I'm thinking about this from every angle with a great jaw-dropping sense of wonder and awe. Human beings are amazing and horrible creatures. And you and I, the living, have to endure with that knowledge now. And that all of the people on those planes, many of them coming home to California, they all died. And every time I get on a plane, it crosses my mind. That's just the way we are, and maybe that's the way I am because of my interest in philosophy. And as a philosophy professor, you and I, if we've spent any time together in one of the webinars or other Friday reflections, you know that I've often reflected on this with you, that philosophy has a lot to do with reflection and contemplation of death and of life, and what is it, and how do we weather its approaching arrival, and how does that help us clarify the values of our life? So I'm not here to kind of pontificate about politics and what to do about terrorism and all of that stuff. I'm thinking about this in a more kind of existential way, like what do you and I take away from horrible tragedies like 9/11? Well, one of the things that occurs to me is here we are 19 years later, still lowering our flags to half-staff, still having memorials all over the place about 9/11, and 3,000 dead. And yet, since March this year, we've had 2 9/11s every week. We're going to hit 200,000 dead here by the presidential election. Easy. 100,000, forgive me. We're going to hit 200,000 dead by the presidential election, 300,000 by the end of the year, 400,000 by the inauguration in January. Those are pretty reasonable, sober projections. So we've had 2 9/11s every week this whole summer. We haven't had one single national recognition, memorial service. There are no flags at half-mast. It's such a curious thing to me, what we choose to ritualize and what we choose to overlook. It's an astonishing thing. Now, I know they aren't the same. Of course they're not the same. But ask the families who have lost loved ones. I think we'd get a kind of different answer, that any death diminishes us. And what we, there's something about war that makes it easier to memorialize than about a disease that has been so grotesquely underestimated and mishandled. So I'm thinking of Socrates, who, as he was facing his own death there, sentenced to death, about to be executed by the Athenian court. Yeah, I'm taking you back to 400 BC Athens. Sorry for the temporal whiplash, but Socrates utters this famous statement. His friends are all crying. He's about to drink the hemlock. He's going to his death rather stoically, I guess we could say. And he's accepting it. And he says, a philosopher rehearses their own death. And again, that line that we've thought about before. Rehearsing means practicing. It means going over it in your mind, not in some morbid, destructive, self-absorbed way, but just to look at it honestly and say, everything around me is going to disappear. I'm going to lose all of this, and it could come at any moment. And to live in that consciousness of impermanence greatly focuses the clarity with which one makes decisions and establishes values in the here and now. That is what we are doing right now worth doing. Is what I am doing today worth doing? Is what I am doing with my life worth doing? There's a saying, how you spend your day is how you spend your life. There's not some great thing called later on when I'll start having high quality experiences or doing what is integral to my living in my authenticity. That's not later. This is later. This is now. And so the contemplation of one's mortality, the contemplation of one's death drives one into that deep self-examination and deep clarification of just looking at everything in my life and starting to get rid of stuff that just doesn't matter and making room for stuff that really feeds my soul, that really serves the needs of others, making my life better to put it in its simplest terms. That when we think about 9/11 and events like that, when we think about COVID-19, when we think about the Oklahoma City bombing, remember the big memorials we had after that? That was less than 200 people died and about 600 people injured. But again, because it was a violent attack, it just catches our imagination. And that was way back in 1995 under President Bill Clinton. So I'm thinking about, of course, our connection to all of those who we have lost, and about John Donne's wonderful poem, No Man is an Island, and how the deaths of others affect us. So we all probably memorized this poem when you were a school kid, right? Let me lay it on you right here. John Donne, 1624, No Man is an Island. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor, a house of thy friends or thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in all mankind. and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. When you see flags at half-mast, they're half-mast for you. That anyone's death is my own death. Yes, symbolically and metaphorically, but in a profoundly literal way as well. Anybody's death is simply someone going through the door before we do. The door we must all go through. There's nothing distinct or cut off from that experience from what we are going to experience. And that drives us into this, I think, beautiful and deeper affirmation that when you really take in the deaths of others, it gives you a gift. You know, my friend Amar Kapanajar, this young man who's running for Congress in the 50th District against Darrell Issa, he's an old friend of mine, was a former philosophy student of mine 12 years ago at Southwestern College. Many of you know this story. He and I talk about this kind of stuff a lot. His life was shaped by war, and my family's life was certainly shaped by war under the Nazis in Europe and the stories I grew up with and the violence of that time. So there is, hang on a second. Sorry, everybody. We're still working out these technical challenges. My wife just sent me a message that Kelly sent. So looks like we're having some technical challenges. And they texted her, so she came in to talk to me. So yeah, anyway. I don't know what's going on. And good luck to everybody behind the scenes trying to make it work. Looks like we have 81 folks on the call. I don't know how many we were supposed to have. But anyway, let me carry on here. So, where was I? There is this sense that about how the deaths of others shape us, and what Amar and I were talking about is, since he's lost friends in war, we've all lost people, right? And so, what you take away from that is that now going forward, my life is not my own. I'm living for them too. I must somehow carry the value of their life tucked up inside of mine, like I'm living for two now or three, that they got cut short and they'll never again have that rich experience of just drinking a cup of tea, reading a book inside on a rainy afternoon. And so I can savor that cup of tea and that reading of that book inside on that rainy afternoon. I can savor it for myself, but also in this expanded sense of knowing what beyond that the concentric circles are that connect us all. Marcus Aurelius, again, was so good on this. And let me close with him. And also an apology for anybody who had trouble getting into the webinar or who hasn't gotten in. Well, if you're not here yet, you're not hearing me talk. But anyway, all of you who successfully got in, well done. you passed the test. But let me leave you with some thoughts from Marcus Aurelius, just to kind of whet your appetite for the upcoming webinar here on Tuesday at the end of this month. He wrote, and Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, right from the 1st and 2nd century, he wrote, "So this is how a thoughtful person should await death, not with indifference, not with impatience, not with disdain, but simply viewing it as one of the things that can happen to us. How you anticipate the child's emergence from its mother's womb. That's how you should await the hour when your soul will emerge from its compartment." So there's a certain why is death any different than being born kind of idea here. And in a more stark passage, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Think of yourself as dead." That's kind of like what Socrates just said, right? That the philosopher, the lover of wisdom, rehearses their own death. He says, think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. So the affirmation of that idea, that the point is not to wallow in, oh, I'm going to die someday, but to just say yes to that and then come back to this moment and just really do it. Just really live it. He says, human lives are brief and trivial. Yesterday, a blob of semen. Tomorrow, embalming fluid and ash. Ouch. That's really stark. He wrote this too: to pass through this brief life as nature demands, to give it up without complaint, like an olive that ripens and falls, praising its mother, thanking the tree it grew on. Here's another one. Don't worry about how long you'll go on doing this. A single afternoon would be enough. What if we only had this afternoon? What would you do? Why would you do it? How would you do it? Who would you call? What would you stop doing immediately? Finally, this last bit, and then we'll close up. Alexander the Great, the most famous, powerful guy in the world, and his mule driver both died. And the same thing happened to both. They were both absorbed alike into the life force of the world, or dissolved alike into atoms. So I don't know what all your ideas are about the afterlife. We have all kinds of different ideas. This isn't about that. This is about this life, and about how we reflect upon tragedies like today that we can't do anything about, that we just bear witness to with gut-wrenching horror and grief. But what do we do with it? And how do we go forward? Are you living your life for two? Is there someone you've lost in your life, maybe when you were quite young, that you sort of took inside of you and said, you know what, I'm going to be bolder. I'm going to take bigger risks. I'm going to not be so afraid, because I have to live for two now, or three, or five. That's power, and that's freedom. And it's the doorway to bliss and depth and authenticity. This is the gift that our reflection on death gives us on this holy day when so many of us fell in a horrible war. We need to walk and to not maybe talk, and to just be with our feelings today. That's what I'll be doing when I sign off. Take this tie off, get outside with my dog, and maybe not talk to anybody for a couple hours and just be. And I hope that you, in your own way, as an individual, you practice what you need to practice. And I'm filled, of course, with gratitude and humility that so many of you would come into this space and share this space with me. Thank you again to SanDiegoOasis, working valiantly behind the scenes with whatever technological challenges we all are facing today. Everything looks groovy on my end. I'm doing my thing here. And for those of us that were able to stay connected, thank you so much for being with us today. See you all on the other side. Goodbye.